Well, this is a real pleasure for me to get to introduce our keynote speaker, our special guest, Congressman Jim McGovern. Many of you have gotten to know him over the past year since the redistricting was announced just about a year ago. And I've been aware and followed Congressman McGovern's career since he was elected in 1996, but I'd never really had worked with him or interacted with him very much until a year ago when he began coming into what will be the new 2nd Congressional District, shifting from his home base in Worcester, and his current district goes down to Fall River in southeastern Mass. But he's a lucky guy, and we're very lucky because he's coming into Franklin County and Hampshire County, and I think we align extremely well with the values and the expertise and the type of hard work and hands-on detail that Jim McGovern is known for. Jim is now in his 8th term. He is the 2nd ranking member on the very powerful House Rules Committee, and he serves on the House Agriculture Committee, which has been mentioned, and that's of particular interest to us here in the Valley because it's such an important part of our economy and our quality of life, and to have someone who sits on that very important committee is really very special. He is also, as mentioned in the program, the co-chair of the House Hunger Committee, where he's provided leadership in the fight against hunger, both here at home and abroad. The thing that I really admire about Jim McGovern is that he is a real outspoken advocate for social justice, for human rights, for people getting a fair deal. He's not someone who shies away from talking about issues that a lot of times political figures don't like to talk about, like poverty and income disparity, and again, just creating a more fair and just society. Jim McGovern is known for that, and we're really, really lucky that he's coming into Franklin County to work with all of us in the human service field and in agriculture and in so many other activities here. So please join me in welcoming our new Congressman, Jim McGovern.
Well, first of all, let me thank Steve for the very generous introduction and for all of his incredible work, and this panel of legislators. You elect some really good people out here, and I want to thank Steve Kulik and Denise Andrews and Paul Mark and Ben Downing and Stan Rosenberg, all great friends, all great advocates, really out front on these issues of justice and of fairness. And so I want to commend you for the people you elect. I hope to be amongst them after Tuesday. But I also want to thank Claire Higgins, who's a good friend who I've admired for a long time when she was the mayor of Northampton, and now in the work that she does, or the advocacy work that she does now. And there are a lot of people in this room who I have met over the last few months whose work I also admire. So thank you for all that you do. It is a real pleasure to be here. And I'm supposed to give you a little background of what's going on in Washington. And let me begin by saying Washington is a strange place. And that's kind of an understatement. And it's become a frustrating place for me in particular because, you know, I ran for office just like my colleagues here ran for office to help make things better for people, to help improve our communities. It's not just about re-election. It is about trying to improve the quality of life for the people in this Commonwealth and the people across this country. And in Washington today, it has become very fashionable to beat up on poor people and to diminish their struggle. When we talk about balancing the budget, all the tough choices that are put forward are all cuts in programs that benefit the most vulnerable in our country. We're not asking oil companies to go without taxpayer subsidies. We're not asking Donald Trump to pay more, but instead they're saying we've got to balance the budget by cutting food stamps, by cutting WIC, by cutting programs to help small and medium-sized farms, by cutting programs to help provide people with fuel assistance during the winter when they can't afford it. It is really a twisted view of what government's responsibility is and should be. And we need to figure out a way to push back. And we need to find a way to push back stronger and more effectively than we have been over the last few years. there is a great ignorance in Washington about what some of these programs do. As Steve mentioned, I got on the Agriculture Committee, notwithstanding the fact that the district I currently represent is primarily an urban district. I got on the Agriculture Committee because, you know, a lot of what happens in that farm bill benefits people who live in cities, SNAP in particular. And so there's an interest to have somebody to fight for those programs. And over the years, I've become a big believer and a big advocate of SNAP. But I'm the last person in the last row, in the last seat on the Agriculture Committee. Practically, I think I'm almost in the Armed Services Committee. I'm so far down on the level. So I have to listen to everybody speak before it gets to me. And during the recent markup of the Farm Bill, the House Agriculture Committee decided that they were going to find savings to help balance the budget by not cutting excessive subsidies to big agribusinesses, but by instead focusing almost exclusively on the food stamp program, cutting $16.5 billion out of this program. Now, the chairman of the committee said to me, you should be happy because some of the more extreme members wanted to cut $30 billion out, so you should just be happy. The fact of the matter is, with a $16.5 billion cut, if that stays in place, that means millions of people who are benefiting from this food assistance program today, tomorrow will not have it. It also means that hundreds of thousands of children who automatically get enrolled in the free breakfast and lunch program at school because their parents qualify for SNAP will lose that status. And we're told we have to do this because we got to make tough choices. Now, I have to tell you, you know, those aren't tough choices, those are cruel choices. Those are choices that I think diminish the federal government, diminish kind of our moral kind of obligation to people in need. You know, I tell people all the time, budgets are moral documents. I mean, you know, you invest in things that you truly care about. And if budgets that we put forward cut programs that help poor people, but on the other hand, invest in more military spending at a time when the Joint Chiefs of Staff say we don't need any more, or, you know, or protect tax cuts for wealthy people, that's a moral reflection on our Congress, on our government, and on our people for electing people who vote that way. So, you know, we have choices. And yes, these are tough budgetary times. And, you know, I was on the during the debate in the Ag Committee, one of my colleagues said to me, you know, we just can't afford to invest anymore. You know, and my response is we can't afford not to. And here's why. There is a price to hunger and food insecurity. There is a price that is very, very, very high. Avoidable health care costs. I mean, I've been in emergency rooms at Boston Medical Center and at UMass in Worcester, where they'll tell you, you know, kids who are food insecure, who don't have enough to eat, get a common cold, they end up spending a night or 2 or 3 nights at a hospital. Adds to the cost. What could be usually treated with a, you know, with an aspirin and some cough syrup, they end up being in the hospital. Senior citizens who are told that they need to take their medication with the meal, take their medication on an empty stomach because they don't have the money to get the food that they need, end up in the emergency room, end up in a prolonged stay. I mean, issues of obesity. I love the fact that the First Lady is talking about exercise and good food as a way to combat obesity. But what she needs to talk about as well is poverty and hunger, because there is a link between food insecurity and obesity. And so there, you know, that needs to be brought into the discussion. And, you know, I first got involved in this issue way back when I was a college intern working for George McGovern, no relation, but one of my dearest friends in the world who just passed away. And this was one of his passions, and I think it was kind of contagious because I also began to feel very strongly about this, that this is something we can solve. And I tell people all the time that hunger is a political condition. I mean, this isn't like trying to solve peace in the Middle East. We all know what to do here. This is pretty simple, what we need to do here. And yes, it means that government at the local level, at the state level, and at the federal level all have a responsibility. This is not just a federal responsibility, and not just a state responsibility. Every level of government has a role in this. It means the advocacy groups or the non-governmental organizations that are working, have a responsibility. It means our hospitals have a responsibility. Our businesses, our grocers have a responsibility to help promote better, more nutritious food, and help make nutritious food more affordable for people. So it's not always 2 for 1 on Doritos. It's 2 for 1 on locally grown, tomatoes or carrots or whatever, or asparagus from Hadley, whatever. But we ought to be. That's part of the solution here. Schools have a role to play. I mean, there are 1,000 different kind of point people and point institutions that have a role to play. But here's one of the problems: we do not have a plan in this country to end hunger. We do not have a plan really in this state to end hunger. We have lots of good programs and lots of people doing good things, and we have examples locally here and there of where things are coming together, but holistically we do not have a plan. And part of the problem is, I'll give you an example in Congress, there is no one committee that deals exclusively with the issue of hunger or food insecurity. The Ag Committee does their thing on on SNAP. We've got, school feeding over here in another committee. We got, veterans, relief in another committee. And so there's not one kind of committee that's kind of quarterbacking this whole issue, coming up with this plan. Same within the administration. You got multiple departments that have a little piece of this issue, but nobody owns it exclusively. And there's nobody kind of saying, okay, let's all come together and let's work together. Because as we all know, that, not just within governmental agencies, but also within groups and organizations that work in communities, sometimes it's hard to get people to come together. And sometimes it's hard for people to cede, responsibility to another person that may end up being able to handle it better, or vice versa. It becomes very, very difficult. And we are, I believe that that's really at the heart of one of the challenges that we need to overcome. We need to come together. So I've asked the White House, I've asked the President on a number of occasions that he ought to host a White House conference on food and nutrition and bring everybody who has any part of this issue into a room, from our agricultural community, our farmers, to our advocates, to our governors, to our, to the agencies, to schools. Bring everybody in a room together. Lock the doors. Nobody leaves until we come out with a plan that makes it very clear what everybody's assignment is. So Congress, you need to do this. State legislatures, you need to do this. Mayors, you need to do this. Businesses, we're expecting this from you. I mean, where everybody has assignments and where there are clear benchmarks that we can measure, so that as time goes on, if you do your assignment, we can applaud you and give you a gold star on your forehead. But if you don't do your assignment, we want you fired. You need to leave. You're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem. And I really believe that the time has come for this gathering. And I will tell you the truth, and I say this because I love the President, and I'm working hard for his reelection, but it's been really difficult to get people to want to take this issue on. Again, it goes back to what I said before. In Washington, people don't like to talk about poverty. They don't like to talk about the fact that we have tens of millions of people who are hungry in America. And by the way, I just point out one little instance of ignorance on the Agriculture Committee. During the debate, one of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle said to me, well, you know what, I'm looking at the newspaper, and there are all these help wanted ads. People ought to go back to work. And I said, well, yeah, I think people do want to work, but let me tell you this. There are millions and millions of people who are on SNAP right now who work for a living. They work full time, but they don't earn enough to be able to not qualify for SNAP. And going to your point about whether or not we need to adjust the rules and criteria, I think we might need to. But the way to do that, because again, you got SNAP that falls on the USDA, you got some labor requirements that fall on the labor, you got to bring everybody together and say, how do we do this? We can do this. This is you know, and so labor and USDA kind of figure out a way to make this more adjustable, more user-friendly, so that people can get off. But you listen to some of these guys who criticize the SNAP program, you would think that everybody's goal in life, everybody's dream, you know, you hit the jackpot if you qualify for SNAP. Boy, you've made it. Now, a few years ago, before the last Farm Bill, I asked the chairman of the committee at the time, what is the average benefit that a food stamp recipient gets per day? He had no idea. He said to me, you know, it's enough. Well, we researched that. This was before the last Farm Bill. It was $3 a day. So we got 5 of us lived on a food stamp diet for a week on $3 a day. And we kept a blog. And we did it really to kind of call attention to the fact that it is not what people think it is. This is not this, you know, blank check that you can, you know, afford all kinds of goodies with. This is a very, very small supplement. You know, and I will tell you, I went shopping with 2 food stamp recipients in Washington, D.C. And it took me like 2 hours to be able to buy groceries that I thought could last me a week, because you had to live on this for a week. You ran on a Friday, you couldn't go back, you had to live on it for a week. It's hard work to be poor. It takes a lot of time to figure this out. And when you have kids, it's really, really difficult. And so we did this, and you know, a couple of the 5 that did it, maybe 3 of us made it. One of my colleagues had peanut butter that got confiscated at the airport, so he was disqualified because he had to buy some new food. But the point of the matter is that, you know, we have to address this issue not just in terms of the immediate challenges, which is to get people food, you know, not just in terms of kind of the midterm goals. We need to look at it in the long term. The solution here is to help people transition off of public assistance into work. And we need to be talking about things like increasing the minimum wage so that if you work for a living, you know, you can not have to live in poverty. We ought to be talking about ways to make it easier for people to transition to work, and for people with kids to be able to get the support that they need. I mean, there's lots of things here that need to be kind of put on the table. And that's why we need this White House conference. I've been told that we may actually, that the White House may actually move forward with it. We had a preliminary meeting a couple of months ago in response to a movie that is going to come out in February called A Place at the Table. It was a movie that was actually shown at the Sundance Film Festival, and I think it's going to come out in wide release in February and March. But it focuses on a number of families who live on SNAP and their struggles, and everything from getting enough food every week to being able to drive to a place to get food that is actually nutritious. Because it's not just about food, it's about nutrition as well. And apparently a friend of the First Lady saw the film and then came back and said, we ought to do something. And so they convened a group at the White House, which I was part of, to talk about what are the next steps. And everybody said the next step ought to be this White House conference on food and nutrition. And so after Tuesday, you know, I'll give the president until Wednesday afternoon. We're going to be back onto the White House asking them to do this. And I think if they follow through with this, we can have a blueprint that can not only address a lot of the challenges that you've all talked about here today, but we can end hunger in America. I mean, we can move on from this challenge and go on to other challenges. So anyway, let me just close by saying you're a new part of my district. 60% of my district was changed. I was a little nervous when I heard that, but as I'm coming to know what's going on out here, I'm really impressed, and I really look forward to working with all of you. And perhaps maybe an interim step here in Massachusetts is we can actually help provide the model for the White House by maybe doing a Massachusetts conference on food and nutrition. Maybe we could do it in this area here, bring everybody together and get it done. So thank you very much. I appreciate it. And I've been instructed to take a few questions, so anyone has any questions or comments or?
it's really refreshing to see a white man talk about social justice issues, and I want to applaud you for standing up for white privilege as a white man, or I connect it to white privilege, but I think that's a big problem of what we're talking about is privilege in our country and how so many things stem out of privilege, and most of it is ignorance. And ignorance by our leaders who use food stamps or entitlement as a slur word, as something that's awful and we have to get rid of, like you're experiencing in the House, the Agricultural Committee. And that's something I'd like to see happen more, is having a candid conversation, and it sounds like you're already doing that in Washington. But looking at corporate personhood and looking at privilege and having frank conversations about the white men in Congress, looking at how they got there and the privilege that that made it possible for them to be there and continues. And you know, they have programs in schools called Mix It Up, where
Right.
children switch their cliques around and sit with other people. And again, it's great to hear that you're trying to see what it's like to live on SNAP. Well, I'd like to see other people live on these entitlements and see what it's like to have these experiences, because I think that's what's really going to change our country and us as a people, is when we can really walk in other people's shoes. So I just wanted to thank you for doing the good work that you're doing.
Well, let me thank you. The reason why you have such great representation here who are so well informed on these issues is because you've done what I wish everybody across the country would do. Get your elected officials to the food banks, to visit your programs, to meet with people who are struggling, to listen to people who are struggling. I mean, I will tell you, what you do here is not done all around the country. It's, you know, there are members of Congress who have never been into a food bank, who have never visited a school feeding program, you know, and I think that that's problematic. I think if more people were exposed to some of these things, I think just you wouldn't be human if you weren't moved by this. I tell you, you see a hungry child, it breaks your heart. I mean, there's nothing. I have 2 kids. I can't imagine anything worse than my kids not having enough to eat. And so we need to get people to do what you have done at the state and at the federal level, and bring people, bring elected officials into the community and let them see what is going on. And then let them go to Washington and say, I'm going to cut your benefits. I don't think this is a worthwhile program. By the way, I should also tell you that the SNAP program, a food stamp program, is probably one of the most effectively and efficiently run federal programs in our government. I mean, it has an error rate of about 3.7%, and that includes people who get underpaid as part of that error rate. I mean, show me one program in the Department of Defense that has that kind of efficiency rate. If you do, I'll get on this table and do a tap dance. There's no such thing. So, I mean, when people say it's a wasteful program, it isn't. It is one of the best, most efficiently run programs in the federal government, and we ought to brag about that. And when the people call the president the food stamp president, look, the way you get people off of food stamps is you get them back to work. But here's the thing. I'm actually proud we live in a country that has programs that say, when you fall on tough times, when you're vulnerable, we're not going to let you fall through the cracks. You know, it's like growing up in my neighborhood. I grew up in Worcester, you know, and if the next door neighbor hit the lottery, we'd all cheer him on. You know, if the other neighbor, you know, lost his or her job, you know, we over there with the meat tray, you know, and help them get through their difficult time. That's what we do. That's what people do. It's not something we should be ashamed of. And to the extent that we can get people out of poverty, you know, into jobs, and, you know, as we do that, to make sure that they have a lifeline, that they have food and support, you know, I think that's what makes this country great. And if you move away from that, you know, I think it really diminishes who we are. Yeah. Anybody else? Yeah.
Thank you. I wanted to ask about something that you didn't mention. I know that in the previous panel we talked about some incentives through taxes for having gardens in the household and things like that. But on a federal level, I'm wondering if there's any talk about more regulation of the packaged food industry, because the packaged food industry in general is allowed to sell products and provide products that don't really have much nutritional value, and yet they're allowed to be served in schools as snacks if they meet the guidelines as far as sodium and fat content and sugar content, but yet they don't offer anything to help build brains. And then the same thing, you know, those things are often cheaper to purchase than fresh foods. And so, you know, what John Waite was saying before about how local fresh food is more expensive and it's the real price, but other things are cheaper. So I feel like there's some opportunity for more federal regulation, and I realize that's hard to do because in America we should be allowed to choose our poison, but I'm just wondering if there's any movement on that.
You know, to be honest with you, there's not a lot of movement on that. But I think to get around that is we ought to, we ought to do a couple things. One is, we passed the Child Nutrition Reauthorization Act, which provides additional resources for schools to be able to purchase healthier food. There's a kind of a movement going on right now to try to say, that was a bad thing to do because there's a lot more waste and people throwing things away. People would rather have tater tots than apples. And I mean, on and on. We got to push back to make sure that people understand that good nutrition is not a bad thing. It's something we need that should be in schools. The other thing is we need to find ways to highlight and praise and reward schools that do the right thing, that either buy locally produced grown fruits and vegetables, that have their own gardens, and I'd like to say, I'd love to provide. I'd like to be able to say to you, we could provide them incentives. I'm just not sure in this climate, to be very honest with you, that we're going to have a lot of money to put on the table. Our battle in Washington is going to be preventing major cuts in some of these programs. I think Stan mentioned sequestration. Right now under sequestration, SNAP is exempt, all right? But don't feel any comfort in that because I can't believe that the Republicans are going to allow sequestration to go into effect because of the cuts in defense. In fact, they're proposing to eliminate the cuts in defense and spread that across other social programs. They don't like SNAP. So there's, I think we have a real battle when we get back. The other thing is, in Worcester, we've been really pushing this urban garden notion. But we've got 65 urban gardens in Worcester working with the Regional Environmental Council there. I mean, it's really quite incredible. And what's been really nice about it, not only people having access to good food, but it's bringing communities together. I mean, people are actually talking to each other because they're all working the garden. And then people say, well, what if you don't have any land? Well, in Worcester, we have been the recipient of probably the highest number of refugee resettlements in the state. So we have all these new immigrants coming in from all over Asia, Africa, Latin America, and what we're seeing is these immigrant farmers are teaching us how to farm vertically. I visited urban gardens where they're growing beans on clotheslines, where they've taken pallets and they've grown Chinese cabbage out of it. It's like things are growing out of walls, and it's really quite amazing. And what they're doing is they're not only producing enough for their families, the excess is they're selling them in farmers markets, and they're making a little bit of profit. So, we can learn a lot, from some of these immigrant farmers that are coming in about, how to do things a little bit differently. But there's a way to do it, and we're going to launch this big effort to try to get everybody to have a garden. Again, even if you only grow one tomato plant, the access to, those handful of ripe tomatoes that you're going to get, you've grown them, it's good for you. And, but maybe part of what a statewide summit on food nutrition could be about is, what is our garden strategy? What is our urban garden strategy? What is our strategy to get schools to buy locally more? And also, we need more. I want to create a food hub in Worcester because, farmers would actually grow more if there was a place to process, and store their food so that they could, sell it and, in the winter as well. And so we need to be thinking in those terms too. And look, what's happening out here is really unbelievable. It's kind of new renaissance in agriculture and locally grown food. It's amazing. We need to keep it going. We need to make sure that people can afford it, and it's accessible to everybody. But even the efforts to try to protect land so that young people who want to go into farming, can actually afford to go into farming. There's all these wonderful ideas. What we need to do, in the state and on the federal level is very, in my opinion, very simple. Just come up with a plan, a holistic plan. You know, Hillary Clinton says it takes a village. I say it takes a plan. We just need a plan. So what is our plan to end hunger? What is it? What do we need to do? How do we do it? And it's, again, more than just SNAP. It's more than just about supporting local farmers. It's more than just about good food in schools. It's everything. And I think we can do this. I really do. This is doable. I'll end as I began. Hunger is a political condition. I mean, it really is. We have the food, we have the know-how, we have everything but the political will. And, you know, to me, if we could get this right, not only do we improve the quality of life for all of our people, we also improve our health standards as well. But we help support more jobs and small businesses and farming and farmers markets. But the other thing we do is I believe we actually lower the deficit. You know, we actually save people. We actually save, you know, the federal government, you know, additional resources. So it is a win, 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 win for everybody. And so I look forward to working with all of you, you know, and building on your success stories. I mean, I've learned so much in these last few months from what you've been doing here. I mean, it's real, and I've been trying to connect people from UMass Amherst to UMass Worcester to, you know, some of the local farms, trying to share information. But I think we could get this statewide summit together. We'll work with the, you know, the local representatives and senators, and then we're going to work on the president to get this federal thing done. Anyway, so thank you very much for having me here. I appreciate it.